So a couple of weeks ago, the stars kind of aligned, and two friends that I had from college that were very close friends from me that live abroad now came back to visit America at the same time. So we decided as a group of college friends, those of us that lived here and those of us coming in, that we would make a big to-do about it. We were gonna get together and camp. All of our families, spouses, kids, everyone camp on this farm that my friend owns. So we would smoke pork, we would ask everyone to bring a tent and bring various dishes, and it would be great. Now, to get so many families together, parents and kids, all together to camp and to eat was a logistical feat. Just little things. Are we meeting on Friday or on Saturday? Does everyone have a place to stay? Does everyone own a tent? How hot is it going to be? What's the weather like? There were so many moving pieces. And to be quite honest, when I look back at it, it kind of seems like nothing worked out quite right. First thing, selfishly, they decided to meet on Saturday and camp into Sunday, and I'm usually a little busy on Sundays, so I had to rearrange some things. I didn't get to participate in the whole thing. And also, there weren't enough tents, and some people didn't even like to camp, so a few people ended up sleeping in this old RV that was definitely not parked on flat land. So they spent their night sliding down the hill and then shimmering their way back up top instead of sleeping. And then of course it rained, because why would the weather ever decide to cooperate with us? And food, did I mention the food? Now don't get me wrong, it was delicious. And everyone ended up with, not exactly food poisoning, but let's just say everyone had some gastrointestinal distress in the days following. But you know what? It was wonderful. We laughed so hard. We told stories about living in the dorms back at Eastern Kentucky University. Our kids got to know each other. We let them light off fireworks. We played games together. We even had a campfire and sat around and sang songs, despite the rain and everything else. Even though so many things went wrong, and there were a lot of hard things about that weekend, I treasure it, and I will always remember it and be grateful for that time. Now, the reason why I tell you that story is because there are some hard things about our gospel today. Jesus says, "Unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. Those who eat my flesh and drink my blood have eternal life." And that's the light translation. If you want to get really serious, the word that the NRSV translates as eat really more closely means like gnaw or chew. Think about that. 4 weeks ago in our lectionary, Jesus fed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. Then he spent the next few days in the Bible story, or weeks for us, since we only read that each Sunday, explaining why. Explaining that it wasn't really about bread, at least not entirely. Telling those who would listen that he was the bread of life, and that people needed to really partake of that bread, his bread, in order to understand it. He fed them first with real bread and fish. Then he asks them to think about it. He doesn't start with a 4-week discourse on bread until after they had eaten their fill and had leftovers. He starts by saying that eating the bread of life is about connection. That's what I preached on 2 weeks ago. Then he tries saying that it's about relationship. That was last week. And now, today he gets real. He kind of drops the metaphor entirely and says it outright. Eat my flesh and drink my blood. You might say that this week is about feeling, but not emotions. He's not trying to make us feel yucky, but physical feeling. Feeling whole, feeling full, feeling nourished. Now, if we can get past the cannibalistic imagery, and I know that can be disturbing, but if we can get past that, I think what Jesus is doing is promising to nourish the world. He isn't telling us how it works. He doesn't explain. He doesn't instruct. He doesn't teach. Here, he promises. He is less concerned with getting those around him to hear him and understand than he is with getting them to eat, to be nourished. That's why we don't get a parable or any further explanation. He's promising those that will listen that he will provide the nourishment that they need. And as Episcopalians, this is really hard for us because we are a thinking denomination, right? We have this whole image of a stool that tells us that reason and thinking is an important part of this whole faith thing. And it is. Faith without reason can drive you into some pretty dark places. But here's the thing. Faith that is only reasonable isn't faith at all. If a belief comes out of reason alone, it isn't faith at all. It's knowledge. It's being sure. But that doesn't stop us from reading a gospel lesson like the one today, and because we can't be sure about it, just brushing over it or overemphasizing the poetic or metaphorical nature. That's not what he meant. He really meant this really nice and tidy thing. Or even just downright rejecting it. I don't read that passage. I don't believe in that. It's not applicable to my life. And you know what? We're not the only ones that find it hard. If you read on in John's gospel, the next thing that happens is a bunch of people desert Jesus. John writes, "Because of this, many of his disciples turned back and no longer went about with him." What would it look like for us to take seriously what Jesus is asking of us? Now listen carefully, because I'm not asking what it would look like for us to take literally what Jesus is asking for us. I'm not interested in having that discussion. Not that the discussion wouldn't be valid, but what I'm interested in today is how, if we're asking whether or not Jesus is being literal, then we're missing the point. If we take seriously what Jesus is asking of us, then we take seriously the fact that our God, who came down from heaven and became incarnate in that Jesus, is the closest thing possible to us, closer than anything we can imagine, is that which sustains us and gives us life, real life, breath, movement. Our God is an incarnational God involved in every being of our creation, one that ate with his friends, one who suffered and bled and died. Our God is a God who wants us to be so intertwined with the divine that it is flowing in our veins. It's within us. That it is like the very food that is broken down into calories and carbohydrates and fuels our every action. That is our God. And listen, I get what that means is completely antithetical to how society views things or what we're taught to look at things, the way we're taught to look at things. These concepts are hard enough to even put into words, much less to prove it or explain it or give a logical reason statement as to why this makes sense. When you truly accept that God is the substance which defines you, you turn your back on those norms, on this life that is explainable, and face the reality that you are truly and perfectly made. Perfectly. And again, it doesn't make sense. You can look at me and see it's not perfect, right? You can look at the sound quality and the atmosphere. I'm sweating. There's no air conditioner here. It's not perfect. You can see that. But when you face that fact that it isn't something that you can understand or talk about, it's something that you just know in your bones. It isn't cerebral. It's physical. It's like gnawing or chewing and feeling full instead of pondering or believing and understanding that you've received some great gift. When Jesus asks us to eat his flesh, he is asking us to put aside our desire for ideas or our need for ideologies and put our trust in a God who wants to abide in us. to live in us, to be intimately connected with us in every way. And that sounds huge. It sounds spectacular. But even something that's spectacular, believing that God is in you all the time as part of you, if we really buy into it, is also so incredibly ordinary. It's like eating. It's that which happens all the time, every day, because it's life. It's the kind of thing that seems ordinary and mundane until you feel it and you realize what's happening. It isn't a glimpse of the purpose of life or a moment where you see the center of the universe. It's that time when you look up at the stars and realize the truth of how small you are standing there on the earth. But then you feel the wind on your face or the grass in your feet. You hear the cicadas or the faint sound of water in the distance. And you just have a moment where you know that this moment is yours, that your life is special, and that God is for you. It isn't praying for things to work out and then working out exactly how you wanted, or it isn't, well, this door closed, but God opened another. It isn't realizing amazing coincidences or synchronicities occurring through prayer. It's planning for weeks to get a bunch of families together to camp on a farm and having almost nothing go as planned, but knowing that everything is exactly as it should be. God is for you. Jesus is within you. But that isn't something that you can just know. You have to feel it.